The morphine was wearing off when I heard voices in my hallway. Strange voices. A man laughing about something, a woman asking where the bathroom was, and the unmistakable sound of rolling luggage wheels against my hardwood floors. I blinked hard, wondering if the anesthesia was playing tricks on my mind. 3 days post-surgery, still bedridden with strict orders not to move, and my quiet suburban home in Riverside had somehow become Grand Central Station. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Williams, and at 58, I thought I'd weathered the worst storms life could throw at me. Divorced 15 years ago when my ex-husband decided his secretary was more interesting than our 20-year marriage. Raised my son Derek as a single mother while working as a dental hygienist. Watched him graduate college, get his marketing degree, move back home to save money for his own place. We developed what I thought was a respectful adult relationship. He paid a small amount of rent, helped with groceries, and kept me company in our modest 2-story house on Maple Street. The emergency surgery had come out of nowhere. What started as mild abdominal pain on a Tuesday morning escalated into a ruptured appendix by evening. Derek drove me to Riverside General, held my hand while they prepped me for surgery, and promised he'd take care of everything while I recovered. The operation went well, but complications kept me hospitalized for 2 extra days. When I finally came home, weak and sore, Derek helped me to my bedroom and assured me he'd handle all the household responsibilities. That was Thursday afternoon. By Saturday morning, my peaceful recovery had turned into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. The voices downstairs were getting louder. I could hear footsteps on my staircase, people talking about checking out the upstairs bathroom, and someone commenting on how cozy the place was. My bedroom door was closed, but through the thin walls of our 1970s ranch house, every sound carried with crystal clarity. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my surgical incision pulling painfully as I stretched. Derek's number went straight to voicemail. I tried again, still voicemail. The third time, I left a message. "Derek, there are strangers in our house. I can hear people upstairs. Where are you? Call me back immediately." 20 minutes passed. The voices moved around the house freely, and I heard what sounded like multiple conversations happening simultaneously. Someone was in the kitchen, commenting on the coffee maker. Another person was discussing the living room furniture. A child's voice asked about the television remote. My heart was racing, which my doctor had specifically warned against. I was supposed to rest, avoid stress, let my body heal. Instead, I was lying in my bed listening to what sounded like a house tour conducted by strangers. When Derek finally called back, his voice was unnaturally cheerful. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling? Sorry I missed your calls. I was out getting groceries." "Derek, there are people in our house. Multiple people. I can hear them walking around, talking about our furniture. What's going on?" Silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Derek finally spoke, his tone had shifted to something I'd never heard before. Defensive, but also strangely casual. "Oh, right. I meant to mention that earlier. Don't worry about it, Mom. Everything's under control." "Mention what? Who are these people?" "Well, since you're going to be stuck in bed for a few weeks anyway, I figured we might as well make some money. I listed a few rooms on Airbnb. You know, help with the mortgage, make your recovery a little less financially stressful." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You did what?" It's actually pretty brilliant when you think about it. You're not using the guest room or the upstairs bathroom anyway. These people are just staying for the weekend. They're super respectful, and we're making $400. I struggled to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through my abdomen. "Derek, you rented out rooms in my house without asking me? While I'm recovering from surgery?" "Mom, calm down. You're supposed to avoid stress, remember? This is actually helping us. The mortgage payment is due next week, and your medical bills are going to be expensive, even with insurance. That's not the point." My voice was getting louder, and I could hear it carrying through the house. "These are strangers, in our home. I'm vulnerable, I can barely move, and you've invited random people to stay here?" They're not random people. They have reviews on Airbnb. They're a family from Oregon visiting colleges with their daughter. They're totally harmless. I pressed my palm against my forehead, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. How many people, Derek? Just 4, 2 parents, their daughter, and her boyfriend. They're using the guest room and the pull-out couch in the living room. 4 strangers sleeping in my house while I was bedridden and helpless? The violation felt overwhelming. When do they leave? Sunday evening. It's just 2 nights, Mom. You won't even know they're here. I already know they're here. I can hear everything. They're walking around like they own the place. Look, Mom, I'm sorry I didn't run it by you first, but you were pretty out of it when you got home from the hospital. I made an executive decision to help our financial situation. You'll thank me when you see how much money we can make doing this. The casual way he dismissed my concerns sent a chill through me. This wasn't the son I'd raised. This was someone treating me like an inconvenience in my own home. Derek, I want you to come home right now. We need to talk about this in person. I can't right now. I'm meeting with someone about a job opportunity, but I'll be home later tonight and we can discuss everything then. What job opportunity? Just some freelance marketing work. Nothing major. Look, I have to go. Try to get some rest and don't worry about the guests. They're really nice people. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking with a combination of pain medication side effects and pure rage. My son had turned my home into a hotel without my knowledge or consent, and he was treating it like a minor inconvenience I should be grateful for. The voices downstairs continued their casual exploration of my private space. I heard someone comment on the family photos in the hallway, someone else asking about the thermostat. A woman's voice mentioned how lived in and comfortable everything felt. Lived in, because it was my life, my home, my private sanctuary that they were treating like a vacation rental. I forced myself to think rationally. Derek was 26 years old, college educated, and generally responsible. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding or momentary lapse in judgment. Maybe the stress of my surgery had affected his decision-making. Maybe he really thought he was helping with medical expenses. But as I lay there, listening to strangers discuss my belongings, another possibility crept into my mind. What if this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision? What if Derek had been planning this? The timing seemed too convenient, too organized for something he'd thrown together while I was in the hospital. My laptop was on the dresser across the room, but getting to it would require more movement than my doctor had approved. I managed to slide my legs over the side of the bed and slowly shuffle across the floor, each step sending waves of discomfort through my healing incision. I opened my laptop and navigated to Airbnb's website. Creating an account took a few minutes, but once I was logged in, I could search for listings in my area. I typed in my address and my heart sank. There it was. My house. Listed as cozy family home near university, perfect for college visits. The photos showed my living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and even the upstairs bathroom. Professional quality images that had clearly been taken with care and planning. The listing had been active for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Derek had been planning this for 3 weeks, long before my surgery? This wasn't a spontaneous decision to help with medical bills. This was a calculated business venture using my home as inventory. I scrolled through the details with growing horror. The listing promised quiet neighborhood, friendly hosts, and authentic local experience. Derek had described himself as the property manager and included his photo and a brief bio about being a recent college graduate helping his mother manage the property. The reviews section made my stomach turn. 5 different families had stayed in my house over the past 3 weeks. While I was working my regular schedule, coming home tired from dental cleanings and root canal procedures, Derek had been hosting strangers in my guest room. Patricia was recovering from surgery during our stay, so we mainly interacted with Derek. He was very accommodating and made sure we had everything we needed. The house is exactly as described. Another review mentioned
quiet household. The mother was sleeping most of the time, which was perfect for our needs. Derek was an excellent host. They knew I was recovering from surgery. Derek had used my medical condition as a selling point, assuring guests that the house would be quiet because I'd be bedridden and medicated. I clicked through more reviews, each one revealing additional details about the scope of Derek's deception. He'd been hosting people regularly, charging between $300 to $500 per stay, and building a small business around my property while I was completely unaware. The financial tab showed his earnings, $2,400 over 3 weeks. I sat back in my desk chair, my surgical site throbbing from the exertion of walking across the room. The sound of laughter downstairs reminded me that the current situation was still ongoing. 4 strangers were currently living in my house, believing they'd legitimately rented the space, while I was trapped in my bedroom trying to process the magnitude of my son's betrayal. I picked up my phone and called Derek again. This time he answered on the first ring. "Mom, I told you I'd be home later. You really need to rest." "Derek, I found your Airbnb listing." The silence that followed confirmed everything I'd discovered. "You've been doing this for 3 weeks. You've made almost $2,500 renting out my home without my knowledge. You used my surgery as a marketing strategy." "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for 3 weeks? That you turned my home into a business behind my back? That you're using my medical emergency to reassure guests that they'll have privacy?" "It's not like that. I was going to tell you, but I wanted to prove the concept first, show you how much money we could make. Your mortgage payment is $1,800 a month, and you're always stressed about finances." "My finances are none of your business. This is my house, Derek, my home, my private sanctuary where I should feel safe and secure." "But you weren't even using the guest room." "That's not the point." I could feel my blood pressure rising, which is exactly what my doctor had warned against. "The point is consent. The point is trust. The point is that you don't get to make decisions about my property without asking me." Okay, you're right. I should have asked first. "But Mom, look at the numbers. We can easily make $1,500 a month doing this. That's almost your entire mortgage payment." The fact that he was still trying to sell me on the idea after I'd discovered his deception was perhaps the most infuriating part of the entire conversation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"Derek, I want these people out of my house. Tonight." "Mom, I can't do that. They paid for 2 nights. They have a contract. If I cancel their stay without cause, Airbnb will penalize my account and possibly ban me from the platform." "Your account? Your platform? This is my house." "But I set up the listing under my name because you don't have an Airbnb account. Technically, I'm the host and they have guest rights." The casual way he explained how he'd trapped me in this situation made my head spin. Derek had created a legal framework that protected the guests and his Airbnb account while leaving me with no immediate recourse. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They can finish their stay. But Derek, when they leave on Sunday, this stops. You're canceling the account, refunding any future bookings, and we're having a serious conversation about your living situation." "Mom, don't make any rash decisions while you're on pain medication. Let's talk about this rationally when you're feeling better." "I'm thinking very rationally. Rationally enough to wonder what else you've been hiding from me." I hung up before he could respond. The rest of Saturday passed in a haze of discomfort, medication, and hyper-awareness of every sound in my house. The Oregon family seemed pleasant enough. They kept their voices low, cleaned up after themselves in the kitchen, and tried to be respectful. But their very presence felt like a violation. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I was reminded that strangers had access to my personal space. When someone used the bathroom near my bedroom, I listened to make sure they weren't going through my medicine cabinet. The sound of the refrigerator opening made me wonder what food they were eating, whether Derek had given them permission to help themselves to my groceries. By Sunday morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to confront this situation head on, regardless of my physical limitations. I managed to shower and dress, each movement careful and deliberate. The Oregon family was having breakfast in my kitchen when I made my way downstairs, moving slowly with one hand pressed against the wall for support. "Oh!" The woman, probably in her 40s with kind eyes and graying brown hair, stood up immediately. "You must be Patricia. I'm Susan Morrison. We're so sorry to bother you during your recovery." Her husband, a tall man with glasses, also stood and extended his hand. "Tom Morrison, Derek told us you were having surgery. We've tried to be as quiet as possible." Their teenage daughter, maybe 17, looked up from her phone with genuine concern. "Are you okay? You look really pale." The fourth person, presumably the daughter's boyfriend, was about the same age and had the awkward politeness of a teenager trying to make an impression on adults. These were genuinely nice people. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed meeting them, hearing about their college visit, sharing recommendations for local restaurants. But under these circumstances, their kindness almost made the situation worse. "I'm Patricia," I said, accepting Tom's handshake. "And I owe you an apology." Susan frowned. "An apology? For what?" "Because I just learned about this Airbnb arrangement yesterday. My son made these bookings without my knowledge or permission." The family exchanged glances, and I could see confusion and concern growing on their faces. "I don't understand," Tom said carefully. "Derek is listed as the host. He's been managing our entire stay." "Derek is my son. He lives here, but this is my house. I had emergency surgery on Tuesday, and while I was in the hospital, he apparently decided to start renting out rooms." Susan's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, we had no idea. We thought Derek said he was managing the property for his mother, but we assumed you were aware of the arrangement." I'm sure Derek believed he was helping, though I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. "But I want you to know that this situation isn't your fault. You booked in good faith, and you've been wonderful guests." The teenager, who I learned was named Emma, looked mortified. "Should we leave? We can find a hotel." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You paid for your stay, you're checking out this evening anyway, and you've done nothing wrong. I just wanted to introduce myself and apologize for any confusion." Tom was studying my face with the analytical expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Patricia, are you sure you're okay? You seem like you're in pain." "I'm 3 days post-surgery. I probably shouldn't be walking around this much, but I wanted to meet you before you left." "Please sit down," Susan said, pulling out one of my kitchen chairs. "Can we get you anything? Water? Coffee?" The irony wasn't lost on me. These strangers, guests in my own home, were showing more concern for my well-being than my own son had. I accepted their offer of coffee and spent the next hour learning about their family. Tom was a high school principal, Susan worked as a nurse, Emma was a senior looking at colleges, and her boyfriend Jake was considering the same university. They were from Portland, had driven down to look at several California schools, and had chosen our area because of its proximity to the campus. Derek was really helpful with local recommendations. He gave us a whole list of restaurants and showed us the best route to the university. He seems like a really responsible young man, very organized, professional in all his communications. I nodded and smiled, but internally I was wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, I was proud that Derek had represented our family well and made these nice people feel welcome. On the other hand, he'd done it all without my knowledge or permission, using my home as a business venture. After the Morrison family left on Sunday evening, Derek came home with takeout from my favorite Chinese restaurant and an expression that suggested he was hoping food might smooth over our conversation. "How are you feeling, Mom?"
You were up and around a lot today. Dr. Martinez said you should be staying in bed. I felt well enough to meet the people staying in my house, I replied, accepting the container of sweet and sour chicken, but leaving it unopened. They're lovely people, Derek, which makes this whole situation even more complicated. Derek sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "I'm glad you liked them. See? This isn't as bad as you thought. We can be selective about guests. Only host families like the Morrisons." "Derek, there isn't going to be a we in this situation. I've been thinking about this all weekend, and I need you to help me understand something. He opened his own container of food, but didn't start eating. Okay. The listing has been active for 3 weeks. You've hosted multiple families. You've set up a whole system with professional photos, guest communications, cleaning schedules. This isn't something you threw together while I was in the hospital. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. I've been researching it for a while, yes. How long is a while? A few months, maybe since the beginning of the year. I felt a familiar maternal instinct kicking in, the same sensation I'd had when Derek was a teenager and I suspected he was hiding something. There was more to the story. Derek, I want you to be completely honest with me. Why did you start looking into Airbnb? What prompted this idea? He pushed food around his container for a moment before answering. You know how you're always stressed about money, Mom. The mortgage, the utilities, car payments, medical bills. I thought if we could generate some extra income, it would take pressure off you. That's very thoughtful, but it doesn't explain why you didn't discuss it with me first. Because I knew you'd say no. The honesty of that statement hit me like a cold splash of water. Why would I say no? Because you don't like change. You don't like disruption. You would have focused on all the potential problems instead of seeing the opportunity. I studied my son's face, looking for the boy I'd raised, the young man I thought I knew. Derek, do you understand why I'm upset about this? Because I didn't ask permission first. I get it, and I'm sorry. But Mom, I'm 26 years old. I have a college degree. I'm not a child asking if I can have a sleepover. I saw an opportunity to help our family's financial situation, and I took initiative. This isn't about your age or your education. This is about respect and consent. This is my home, Derek, my mortgage, my insurance, my liability if something goes wrong. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about my property, regardless of your intentions. Derek set down his chopsticks and looked at me directly. Okay, you're right. I should have asked first. I apologize for that. But can we at least discuss the possibility of continuing this arrangement now that you know about it? No. Mom, just listen to the numbers. No, Derek. The answer is no. This isn't just about money. It's about my comfort, my privacy, my sense of security in my own home. I don't want strangers staying here. I don't want to worry about liability issues, property damage, or whether guests are going through my personal belongings. But we could set up rules, boundaries. The boundary is that this is my home, not a hotel. End of discussion. Derek's expression shifted to something I recognized from his teenage years. Frustration mixed with the belief that I was being unreasonable. Fine, he said. But I want you to know that you're passing up an opportunity that could genuinely improve our financial situation. In 3 weeks, I made enough money to cover almost 2 mortgage payments. That money that you kept, I assume. Derek paused with a fork full of food halfway to his mouth. I was saving it to show you the proof of concept. The money's in my account, but it was always intended for household expenses. Was it? Because you also mentioned earlier that canceling bookings might affect your Airbnb account. That sounds like you were thinking of this as your business, not our family's income. I set up the account under my name because you don't have one. That doesn't mean I was planning to keep the money. I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone suggested we were having 2 different conversations. Derek seemed to be thinking about this as a business opportunity that he'd generously share profits from, while I was thinking about it as a violation of my personal space that happened to generate money. Derek, I need you to cancel any future bookings and close the Airbnb account. Mom, there are 3 more bookings this month. If I cancel them without cause, I'll get negative reviews and possibly be banned from the platform. Then honor the existing bookings and don't accept any new ones. Derek was quiet for a long moment, staring at his food. When he finally looked up, his expression was resigned, but not entirely convinced. Okay, I'll honor the current bookings and then shut down the listing. Thank you. But I want you to think about something, Mom. You're 58 years old. You work as a dental hygienist, which is physically demanding work. What happens when you can't do that job anymore? What happens when you need more medical care? Social Security and your small retirement account aren't going to be enough.
The questions hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. I'd been having the same concerns myself, especially after facing unexpected surgery and medical bills. Those are valid concerns, Derek, but turning my home into a hotel isn't the solution. What is the solution? I don't know yet, but I know it's not inviting strangers into my personal space while I'm vulnerable and recovering from surgery. Derek nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely satisfied with my answer. As we finished dinner in relative silence, I had the uncomfortable feeling that this conversation was far from over. That night, alone in my quiet house for the first time in days, I lay in bed thinking about everything Derek had said. He wasn't wrong about the financial realities. My job was physically demanding, my retirement savings were modest, and the mortgage still had 8 years left on it. But I was also thinking about the deeper issues this situation had revealed. Derek had made major decisions about my life without consulting me. He'd used my medical emergency as a business opportunity. He'd been running a secret operation in my home for weeks. Most troubling of all, he seemed to genuinely believe he'd been helping and that my objections were unreasonable obstacles to a good idea. I realized I didn't really know my adult son as well as I thought I did. The Derek who'd driven me to the hospital and held my hand during pre-surgery prep was the same Derek who'd spent 3 weeks hosting strangers in my house without my knowledge. Which version was the real Derek? And what else might he be hiding? The next morning brought another wake-up call I wasn't expecting. At 7:30 a.m., my doorbell rang insistently, followed by rapid knocking. I struggled out of bed, still moving carefully due to my healing incision, and made my way to the front window. A delivery truck sat in my driveway, and a man in a brown uniform held what looked like multiple packages. I opened the door wearing my bathrobe, probably looking exactly like what I was, a woman recovering from surgery who shouldn't be answering her own door at this hour. "Patricia Williams?" the delivery man asked, consulting his electronic clipboard. "Yes. I have 5 packages for this address. Some require signature confirmation." He gestured to his truck. "Would you like me to bring them to the door, or can you sign for them here?" 5 packages? I rarely received more than 1 delivery per month, usually just my prescription medications or the occasional online purchase. "I can sign here," I said, taking his electronic device and scrawling my name across the screen. "Can you tell me who they're from?" He consulted his list. Let's see. Amazon, Target, Williams-Sonoma, Bed Bath & Beyond, and one from a company called Hospitality Essentials. None of those made sense. I hadn't ordered anything from any of those retailers, and I'd never heard of Hospitality Essentials. "Are you sure these are for this address?" I asked. 1247 Maple Street, Patricia Williams. That's what my scanner shows. I signed for the packages and watched him stack them just inside my front door. 5 medium to large boxes that I definitely hadn't ordered. As soon as the delivery truck pulled away, I called Derek. "Hey, Mom, you're up early. How are you feeling?" "Derek, did you order packages to be delivered to the house? There are 5 boxes here, and I didn't order any of them." Another pause that lasted too long. "Oh, right. Those are supplies for the Airbnb. I meant to mention that." "Supplies for the what? Derek, you agreed to shut down the listing." "I am shutting it down, but we already have guests booked through the end of the month, and I need to maintain the quality standards. These are just basic hospitality items, fresh linens, coffee supplies, toiletries for guests." I stared at the stack of boxes, my morning confusion rapidly turning into afternoon anger. "You're still spending money on this business that I told you to shut down? It's an investment in maintaining our positive reviews during the transition period. If guests have a bad experience because we don't have proper supplies, they'll leave negative feedback that could affect our reputation." "Our reputation? Derek, there is no our anything. This is your Airbnb account that you're closing down."
Right, but the reviews stay with the address. If I get bad reviews now, it could impact any future hosting opportunities. Future hosting opportunities. Despite agreeing to shut down the operation, Derek was still thinking about future possibilities. Bring those packages upstairs when you get home. We need to go through them together. Mom, you should be resting. I can handle the inventory management. Derek, bring the packages upstairs. Today. After we hung up, I spent 20 minutes wrestling the boxes into my living room so I could examine them properly. Each one was labeled with a different retailer, but the shipping addresses all showed Derek's name at my address. The Amazon box contained what looked like hotel-style toiletries. Individual bottles of shampoo, conditioner, body wash, and lotion. Dozens of them. The Target box held coffee supplies, but not regular coffee. Expensive single-serving pods, artisanal tea bags, fancy creamer packets, and what appeared to be a high-end coffee machine still in its packaging. The Williams-Sonoma box made my stomach drop. Fine linens. Egyptian cotton sheets, premium towels, decorative throw pillows, and a comforter set that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Bed Bath & Beyond had contributed cleaning supplies, but again, not ordinary cleaning supplies. Professional-grade products with labels like hospitality industry approved and commercial strength. The final box from Hospitality Essentials contained items I didn't immediately recognize. Small bottles of room spray, individually wrapped chocolates, welcome cards that could be personalized, and what looked like a guest information binder with plastic sleeves for inserting custom content. I sat on my couch, surrounded by hundreds of dollars worth of supplies for a business I'd explicitly told Derek to shut down, and tried to calculate how much money he'd spent without asking me. The coffee machine alone probably cost $200. The linens looked like they'd run another $300.
The toiletries, cleaning supplies, and hospitality items could easily add up to $400 more. Derek had spent nearly $1,000 on supplies for an Airbnb operation that I'd told him to close down. When Derek came home that evening, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with every item laid out and organized by category. The coffee machine box sat prominently in the center, still unopened. "Mom, you shouldn't be lifting heavy boxes. You could hurt your incision." "Derek, sit down." He glanced at the display uncreated and had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I can explain all of this." "I'm sure you can. Start with the total cost." Derek pulled out his phone and consulted what looked like a shopping app. "Around $900. "But Mom, this is all tax-deductible business expense, and most of these items will last for months." $900. "Derek, do you have $900? "I have the money from the Airbnb bookings. This is a legitimate business expense paid for with business income. Business income generated by using my house without my permission. But income that we're earning together now." I picked up the coffee machine box and read the price tag. $249. "Derek, I own a $20 coffee maker that works perfectly fine. Why do our guests need a $249 coffee machine?" "Because positive reviews mention amenities. Guests expect a certain level of quality, especially at our price point." "Our price point? Our guests?" "Derek, every time you talk about this, you use words that suggest this is an ongoing partnership. But I never agreed to be your business partner." Derek sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. When he looked up, his expression was more serious than I'd seen since this whole situation began. "Mom, I understand that you're upset about how this started. I should have asked your permission before setting up the listing. That was wrong, and I apologize." "Thank you." "But I think you're making a mistake by shutting this down so quickly. Can I show you something?" Before I could object, Derek pulled out his laptop and opened what appeared to be a financial spreadsheet. "In 3 weeks, we've generated $2,400 in revenue. After Airbnb's fees and expenses, that's $2,100 in profit. The supplies I bought today represent a one-time investment that will serve dozens of future guests." He clicked to another tab. "Based on booking patterns and seasonal demand, I project we could generate between $4,000 and $6,000 per month." The numbers were impressive, I had to admit. Even at the low end, $4,000 per month would completely change my financial situation. Derek, I understand the financial appeal, but this isn't just about money. What else is it about? Privacy, security, the fact that strangers are sleeping in my house, the liability if someone gets hurt on my property, the wear and tear on my furniture and fixtures. Derek clicked to another tab on his spreadsheet. I've researched all of those concerns. We can get additional insurance coverage for about $50 per month. We can set house rules that limit liability, and the income more than covers any additional wear and tear. What about my privacy? We only rent the guest room and living room. Your bedroom and office remain completely private. I've already installed a lock on the door to the upstairs area where your personal space is. You installed a lock? Just a simple privacy lock so guests can't accidentally wander into your private area. I stared at Derek, trying to process what he'd just told me. When did you install this lock? Last week, before the Morrison family arrived. Derek, you've been modifying my house, installing locks, without asking me? It's just a basic privacy lock, Mom, the kind you can unlock from either side. I thought you'd appreciate having a clear boundary between the guest area and your personal space. The casual way he discussed altering my home's layout made my head spin. Derek had been treating my house like his business property, making modifications and improvements based on his business needs. Show me this lock. We walked upstairs together, Derek supporting my arm as I climbed slowly. At the top of the stairs, where there had never been a door before, Derek had installed a simple wooden door with a standard doorknob lock. See? Nothing major. It just creates a clear separation between the guest areas downstairs and your private areas up here. I turned the lock and found that it did indeed work from both sides. The installation looked professional, and Derek had even painted the door frame to match the existing trim. How much did this cost? About $150 for the door, hardware, and installation. But Mom, it actually adds value to the house, creates better privacy for everyone. I walked through the upstairs area, seeing my home through new eyes. Derek had essentially converted my house into a 2-unit space. Guests could use the downstairs living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and main floor bathroom without ever needing to access the upstairs area where my bedroom, office, and master bathroom were. Derek, this is more extensive than you initially described. You've been running a much more sophisticated operation than I realized. I wanted to do it right. If we're going to host people in our home, they should have a quality experience. But I didn't agree to host people in my house.
We went back downstairs, and Derek showed me other modifications I hadn't noticed. He'd created a guest information binder with details about the house, neighborhood recommendations, and emergency contact information. He'd added a small basket near the front door with extra keys, maps, and local business cards. In the guest bedroom, he'd installed blackout curtains, added a luggage rack, and placed a small welcome basket with snacks and bottled water. Derek, how much money have you invested in total? He consulted his phone again. Between supplies, modifications, and setup costs, probably around $1,500? $1,500 that you spent without asking me. $1,500 that generated $2,400 in revenue in 3 weeks. The business case was undeniably strong, but I felt like I was losing control of my own home and my own life. Derek, I need you to help me understand something. When did you stop thinking of this as my house and start thinking of it as our business property? Derek was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I guess when I realized how much money we could make and how much it could help our family's financial situation. But it's not our family's financial situation. It's my financial situation. This is my house, my mortgage, my responsibility. Mom, I live here too. I pay rent. I contribute to household expenses. We're both invested in this property. You pay $400 per month rent, Derek. That doesn't give you decision-making authority over my $1,800 mortgage. But it does give me a stake in our household's financial health. I realized we were having a fundamental disagreement about the nature of our living arrangement. Derek seemed to view our situation as a partnership where he had input on major decisions. I viewed it as my home, where he was a temporary resident. Derek,
We need to talk about your living situation. What about it? How long were you planning to live here? Derek looked surprised by the question. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about a specific timeline. Why? Because I think part of the problem here is that we haven't established clear boundaries about your role in this household. I thought I was your son living at home while I save money and figure out my career path. And I thought you were a temporary resident who would eventually move out and establish your own life. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken assumptions and expectations. Mom, are you asking me to move out? I'm asking you to think about what you want your life to look like in the next few years. Because the way you've been making decisions about my home suggests you're thinking of this as a permanent arrangement. Derek sat down on my couch and put his head in his hands. I've been trying to help, Mom. I saw an opportunity to solve some of our financial problems, and I took initiative. But they're not our financial problems, Derek. They're my financial problems, and the solution isn't to turn my home into a business. Then what is the solution? You're 58 years old, working a physically demanding job with a mortgage and medical bills. What's your plan for the future? It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about seriously. I don't know yet, but I know the answer isn't hosting strangers in my home. Derek looked up at me. What if we could find a compromise? What kind of compromise? What if we limited hosting to just a few weekends per month, or only during certain seasons, or only for specific types of guests, like families visiting the university? I could see Derek was genuinely trying to find a solution that would work for both of us. But I was beginning to understand that the real issue wasn't about the details of the Airbnb operation. Derek, the compromise I need is for you to respect my decisions about my own home, whether that's about Airbnb, modifications, or anything else. I do respect your decisions. Do you? Because when I told you to shut down the listing, you spent $900 on supplies. When I told you I didn't want strangers in my house, you installed a door to make it more convenient. Every time I express a concern, you try to solve it with a business solution instead of respecting my boundary. Derek was quiet for a long moment. You're right. I've been trying to convince you instead of listening to you. Thank you for acknowledging that. But Mom, I still think you're making a mistake. This is a legitimate opportunity to improve our financial situation, and you're rejecting it based on emotional concerns rather than practical considerations. And there it was. Derek thought my concerns about privacy, security, and control over my own home were emotional rather than practical. Derek, wanting to feel safe and comfortable in my own home is not emotional. It's fundamental. But we can address those concerns with proper planning and boundaries. The boundary I need is no strangers staying in my house. That's not a problem to be solved with better planning. It's a personal limit that I'm setting. Derek nodded, but I could tell he still didn't fully understand or accept my position. Okay, I'll cancel the remaining bookings and shut down the listing. Thank you. But I want you to keep the supplies we bought, just in case you change your mind. I looked around at the hundreds of dollars worth of hospitality supplies scattered around my living room. Premium linens, fancy toiletries, professional cleaning products, and a coffee machine that cost more than my monthly utility bill. Derek, I'm not going to change my mind. Maybe not, but if you do, we'll be ready. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything that had happened over the past week. My emergency surgery had revealed a side of Derek I'd never seen before. Not just the Airbnb operation, but his entire approach to decision-making and problem-solving. He'd seen my medical emergency as a business opportunity. He'd viewed my financial concerns as problems he could solve without consulting me. He'd modified my home, spent significant money, and committed to hosting strangers, all while I was vulnerable and recovering.
But perhaps most troubling was his continued belief that he was helping, even after I had explained why his actions felt like a violation. I realized I didn't really know my adult son's values, priorities, or decision-making process. The Derek who'd driven me to the hospital was caring and supportive. The Derek who'd been running a secret business from my home was calculating and opportunistic. Both versions were real, which meant I needed to figure out which version would be dominant in our future relationship. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of continuing to argue about the Airbnb situation, I was going to investigate it more thoroughly. If Derek thought this was such a good opportunity, I wanted to understand exactly what he'd been doing and what the real implications were. I started by creating my own Airbnb account and researching other listings in my area. What I found was both enlightening and concerning. Derek had priced our house competitively, but on the higher end of the local market. Most similar properties were charging $80 to $120 per night, while Derek was charging $150 to $200. His pricing suggested he was positioning our house as a premium option. Looking at his listing photos, I could see why. The images were professionally shot, well lit, and made my modest home look spacious and luxurious. Derek had staged each room carefully, adding decorative elements that weren't normally there, and arranging furniture to maximize visual appeal. But the most interesting discovery was in the reviews section. Reading through guest feedback, I found several comments that gave me insight into Derek's hosting style. Derek was incredibly attentive throughout our stay, one review noted. He checked in with us daily and made sure we had everything we needed. Another mentioned, our host went above and beyond to accommodate our special requests and even provided a late checkout when our flight was delayed. Derek wasn't just renting out space in my house. He was actively managing guests, providing concierge-level service, and building a reputation as an exceptional host. A third review mentioned something that made me pause. Derek gave us great recommendations for local restaurants and even made reservations for us at a place that's usually booked weeks in advance. Derek had been acting as a full-service host, using his knowledge of the area and his personal connections to enhance guests' experiences. This wasn't a passive rental arrangement, it was active hospitality management. I was beginning to understand why he'd invested so much money in supplies and modifications. Derek wasn't just running an Airbnb, he was building a hospitality business. The financial projections he'd shown me the day before suddenly made more sense. If Derek could maintain high occupancy rates and premium pricing while providing exceptional service, the income potential was indeed significant. But it also meant Derek was much more invested in this operation than I'd realized. This wasn't a casual side project. It was a serious business venture that he'd been developing for months. I spent the rest of the morning going through Derek's Airbnb host dashboard, which he'd apparently never logged out of on the family computer. What I found there was even more revealing than the guest reviews. Derek had been actively marketing our property on multiple platforms. In addition to Airbnb, he'd listed it on Vrbo, Booking.com, and a regional vacation rental site. He'd created social media accounts showcasing the house and the local area. He'd even registered a business name, Maple Street Hospitality. Maple Street Hospitality had a basic website with professional photos, detailed property descriptions, and a booking calendar that showed availability across all platforms. Derek had built an entire business infrastructure around my house. Most concerning was a section titled Expansion Plans. Derek had been researching other properties in the neighborhood, analyzing their rental potential, and creating financial projections for managing multiple Airbnb properties. Derek wasn't just planning to run one listing from my house, he was planning to build a vacation rental management company, starting with my property as his flagship location. I printed out several pages of Derek's business plans and financial projections, then called him at work. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling today?" "Derek, I need you to come home during your lunch break. We need to discuss your business plans." "My business plans?"
Maple Street hospitality, the expansion projections, the multiple booking platforms, the registered business name. Silence. Derek? I'll be home in an hour. When Derek arrived, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with his printed business plans spread out like evidence at a trial. Mom, I can explain all of this. Derek, this isn't just an Airbnb listing. You've created an entire hospitality business using my house as your foundation. Derek sat down across from me and looked at the papers. I was going to tell you about the expansion plans once I proved the concept with our house. Our house? Derek, it's my house, and these expansion plans involve managing other people's properties? The idea was to start with our house, to build a track record and reputation, then offer property management services to other homeowners who want to get into short-term rentals but don't have the time or expertise to manage them themselves. I picked up a page titled Year 2 Projections. Derek, you're planning to manage 10 properties by next year? It's just a projection, a business goal. A business goal that depends on using my house as your proof of concept. Derek leaned back in his chair. Mom, I've been thinking about this for months. The vacation rental industry is growing rapidly. There's real opportunity here to build something significant. But you're building it on my property without my consent. I was going to make you a partner, offer you equity in the business in exchange for using the house as our flagship location. I stared at Derek, trying to process what he just said. You were going to make me a partner in a business I never agreed to join? I was going to present you with a formal business proposal once I had enough data to show the potential. Derek, do you understand that I might not want to be in the hospitality business? Why wouldn't you? The income potential is substantial, and you'd be an owner, not just an employee. I realized Derek had been planning my future without consulting me. In his mind, he'd been developing a business opportunity that would solve my financial problems and create a career path for himself. Derek, what if I said no to your business proposal? Why would you say no? What if I just didn't want to be in business with you? What if I preferred to keep our relationship as mother and son rather than business partners? Derek looked genuinely confused by the question. But Mom, this could set us both up financially for the rest of our lives. And what if financial security isn't my primary concern? What if I value other things more than maximizing income? Like what?
Like privacy, like simplicity, like being able to relax in my own home without worrying about guest experiences and business operations. Derek was quiet for a moment. I never thought you'd prefer privacy over financial security. Why not? Because you're always stressed about money. You work overtime whenever it's available, you shop sales and use coupons, you worry about car repairs and medical bills. I thought financial security would be your priority. Derek wasn't wrong about my financial concerns, but he'd misunderstood what kind of solutions I'd be willing to accept. Derek, being concerned about money doesn't mean I'm willing to do anything to make more of it. But this isn't anything. This is a legitimate business opportunity with real potential. For you, maybe, but I didn't choose to be an entrepreneur. I chose to be a dental hygienist. I like my job, Derek. I like working with patients and being part of a healthcare team. I'm not looking for a career change. Derek looked at his business plans scattered across the table. So, what happens to all of this? You shut down the listings, cancel the future bookings, and find a different flagship property for your business. Mom, do you know how expensive it would be to rent a property just to use as an Airbnb? The profit margins would be completely different. Then maybe you need to find a different business model. Derek gathered up his papers and closed his laptop. I think you're making a mistake, Mom. This opportunity might not come around again. Derek,
The mistake would be building my future around a business plan I never agreed to participate in. After Derek left to go back to work, I sat in my quiet house and thought about everything I'd learned over the past few days. My son wasn't just irresponsible or inconsiderate. He was ambitious, entrepreneurial, and genuinely convinced that he was helping me. But he was also presumptuous, controlling, and unwilling to accept that I might have different priorities than he did. I realized that Derek and I were going to need to have a much bigger conversation about our relationship, our living arrangement, and our respective futures. But first, I needed to make sure the Airbnb situation was completely resolved. I picked up my phone and called Derek again. "Mom, I'm at work. Can this wait until tonight?" "Derek, I want confirmation that you're canceling all future bookings today." "I told you I would handle it." "I want you to handle it now, while I'm on the phone. I want to hear you make the cancellation calls." "Mom, that's not necessary. I said I'd take care of it." "Derek, I've lost trust in your word about this situation. I need verification that you're actually shutting it down." Another long pause. "Fine, I'll log into the platforms now and cancel everything." For the next 20 minutes, Derek walked me through the cancellation process for each booking platform. 3 more reservations were canceled, with Derek explaining to guests that the property was no longer available due to family circumstances. With each cancellation call, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that strangers would no longer be staying in my house, but sadness that Derek's hard work and planning were being dismantled. "There," Derek said after the final call. "All future bookings are canceled and the listings are deactivated." "Thank you." "Mom, I want you to know that I still think this was a good opportunity." "I understand that, Derek. And I want you to know that I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit, even if I can't support this particular venture." "So what happens now?" "Now we figure out what kind of relationship we want to have going forward." That evening, Derek and I had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Not about Airbnb or business plans, but about our expectations for our relationship and our living arrangement. Derek admitted that he'd been thinking of our arrangement as a long-term partnership rather than a temporary living situation. He'd been making decisions about my house because he'd started thinking of it as our house. I explained that while I loved having him in my life, I needed him to respect my independence and my decision-making authority over my own home and future. We agreed that Derek would start looking for his own apartment, not as a punishment for the Airbnb situation, but as a natural step toward adult independence. We also agreed that any future business ideas Derek wanted to pursue would be discussed openly and honestly, without any secret planning or implementation. As I went to bed that night, I felt like I'd reclaimed control over my own life and home. But I also felt proud of Derek's ambition and business acumen, even if I couldn't support his particular approach. The Airbnb situation had revealed problems in our relationship, but it had also shown me that my son was capable of much more than I had realized. He just needed to learn to pursue his goals without bulldozing over other people's boundaries. And I needed to learn to support his ambitions while still protecting my own needs and priorities. It wasn't the outcome Derek had hoped for, but it was the foundation for a healthier relationship between two adults who loved each other but had very different ideas about how to live their lives. 2 weeks later, I thought the Airbnb situation was behind us. Derek had been apartment hunting, we'd established new boundaries about communication and decision-making, and I was finally feeling like I had my home back to myself. My surgical recovery was progressing well, and I was planning to return to work the following Monday. That's when I received a phone call that changed everything. "Ms. Williams, this is Jennifer Martinez from the city's Code Enforcement Department. We've received a complaint about illegal commercial activity at your address." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "What kind of complaint?" operating an unlicensed bed and breakfast without proper permits, running a commercial lodging business in a residential zone. There are also concerns about parking violations and noise complaints from neighbors. My heart sank. Can you tell me who filed the complaint? I can't reveal that information, but I can tell you that we have documentation showing regular short-term rental activity at your property over the past month. We'll need to schedule an inspection to assess any violation.
Derek, what kind of legal trouble are we in? I don't know. Let me research this and call you back. An hour later, Derek arrived at the house with a stack of printed papers and a grim expression. Mom, we have a problem. The city's zoning laws are very clear about short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. We should have applied for a conditional use permit before starting the Airbnb. What does that mean? It means we've been operating illegally for 3 weeks. The fines can be substantial, and they can force us to cease operations immediately. But we already ceased operations. That doesn't matter. We still violated the law for the period we were operating. The fines are calculated per day of violation. I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. How much are we talking about? Derek consulted his papers. Anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per day, depending on the specific violations they cite. I did quick math in my head. 3 weeks of operation, potentially $1,000 per day in fines, meant we could be looking at $21,000 in penalties. Derek, I don't have $21,000. I know, I'm going to call a lawyer and see what our options are. Our options? Derek, this was your business. These should be your fines. Derek looked uncomfortable. Actually, Mom, that's complicated. The property is in your name, so legally, you're responsible for any zoning violations that occur on your property. The implication hit me like a cold slap. You're saying I'm legally responsible for fines related to a business I didn't know you were running? I'm saying we need legal advice to figure out how to handle this. No, Derek, you need legal advice. I need to figure out how to protect myself from the consequences of your decisions. Derek's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before. Not guilt or remorse, but calculation. Mom, if you throw me under the bus on this, it's going to hurt both of us. We're better off presenting a united front and trying to minimize the penalties. A united front? Derek, I was recovering from surgery while you were running an illegal business from my house. But you know about it now. If we go to court, they're going to ask what you did to stop the illegal activity once you became aware of it. I stared at my son, realizing he was suggesting that my knowledge of his operation made me complicit in its illegality. Derek, are you threatening me? I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining the legal reality. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. The coldness in his voice sent chills down my spine. This wasn't the Derek who'd held my hand in the hospital. This was someone calculating how to minimize his own exposure by implicating me. Derek, I want you to leave. Mom, we need to discuss our strategy. I want you to pack your things and leave my house. Today. Derek's mask slipped for a moment, and I saw genuine surprise. You're kicking me out over this? I'm protecting myself from someone who just threatened to drag me down with him rather than take responsibility for his own actions. I wasn't threatening you. I was trying to explain you were trying to make sure I stayed loyal to you instead of protecting myself. That's a threat, Derek. Derek stood up and gathered his papers. Fine. But Mom, you're making a mistake. We're stronger together than we are separately. No, Derek, you're stronger when you can hide behind me. I'm stronger when I'm honest about what actually happened. After Derek left, I called a lawyer myself. Not to coordinate a defense strategy with Derek, but to understand my own legal position and how to minimize my personal liability. The attorney, Margaret Thompson,
was experienced in municipal law and zoning violations. After I explained the situation, she gave me advice that was both reassuring and sobering. Patricia, the fact that you were hospitalized during most of the illegal activity and immediately shut it down once you discovered it works in your favor. But Derek is right that property owners are ultimately responsible for activities on their property. What kind of penalties am I looking at? That depends on several factors. How cooperative you are with the investigation, whether you can demonstrate that you acted to stop the violations once you became aware of them, and whether the city believes you were a willing participant or an unwitting victim. How do I prove I was unwitting? Medical records, showing your surgery dates, documentation of when you discovered the activity, evidence that you immediately took steps to shut it down. Margaret walked me through the process of preparing for the city inspection and the formal hearing that would follow. The key was demonstrating that I'd been a victim of Derek's deception rather than a partner in his illegal business. Patricia, I have to ask, do you have any documentation of Derek's activities? Anything that shows the scope of his operation or his intent to deceive you? I thought about Derek's business plans, his expansion projections, his registered business name. Actually, yes, quite a bit. Good. That could be very helpful in establishing that this was his operation, not yours. The city inspection took place 3 days later. Inspector Martinez was professional but thorough, documenting the modifications Derek had made to the house, the commercial supplies still stored in my garage, and the evidence of commercial activity. Miss Williams, I can see that significant modifications were made to facilitate short-term rentals. The door installation, the commercial-grade supplies, the staged furnishings. This wasn't a casual rental arrangement. No, it wasn't. My son was building a business without my knowledge. Where is your son now?
He moved out after I discovered the extent of his activities. Inspector Martinez made notes on his tablet. Miss Williams, I want you to know that your cooperation is noted. Many property owners in these situations try to deny knowledge or minimize the scope of violations. I just want to resolve this honestly and appropriately. The formal hearing is scheduled for next month. You'll receive a notice with the specific charges and potential penalties. A week later, I received the official citation: 3 violations: operating a lodging business without a permit, conducting commercial activity in a residential zone, and failure to collect applicable taxes on commercial income. The potential penalties were staggering, up to $15,000 in fines, plus back taxes and fees that could add another $3,000 to the total. I called Margaret immediately. $18,000, Margaret? I don't have that kind of money. Patricia, those are maximum penalties. We're going to argue for reduced fines based on your cooperation and the circumstances. But I need you to gather every piece of evidence you have about Derek's activities. I spent the next week organizing Derek's business plans, his financial projections, his expansion strategies, and documentation of every modification he'd made to my house. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone who'd been planning and executing a sophisticated business operation without my knowledge. Margaret reviewed everything and nodded approvingly. This is excellent. It clearly shows that Derek was the architect and operator of this business. You were an unknowing property owner whose home was used without consent. Will that be enough to avoid the fines? It should significantly reduce them. But Patricia, there's something else we need to discuss. Derek's activities may have created tax liabilities that you're responsible for. What kind of tax liabilities? If the city determines that income was generated from your property, the IRS may want to know why that income wasn't reported on your tax returns. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet, but I didn't know about the income. That may not matter to the IRS. Property owners are generally responsible for reporting income generated by their property, regardless of who actually collected that income.
Margaret explained that Derek's Airbnb earnings could be considered rental income that should have been reported on my tax returns. If the IRS decided to investigate, I could face additional penalties and back taxes. How much money are we talking about? Derek reported earning $2,400 over 3 weeks. If he'd continued at that pace for a full year, it could represent $40,000 in unreported rental income. The tax implications could be substantial. I called Derek that evening, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail explaining the tax situation and asking him to call me back. He didn't return my call. I tried again the next day, and the day after that. Derek was apparently avoiding me, which made me suspect he understood the legal implications better than he'd initially let on. Finally, I decided to drive to Derek's new apartment. I'd gotten the address from the rental application references he'd asked me to provide. Derek lived in a modern complex across town, the kind of place that catered to young professionals with decent incomes. When he answered the door, he looked surprised and uncomfortable to see me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Derek, we need to talk about the tax implications of your Airbnb income." "What tax implications?" "The IRS may consider your earnings to be rental income that should have been reported on my tax returns." Derek's face went pale. "That's not possible. The income was generated by my business activities, using my property. Margaret says property owners are responsible for reporting income generated by their property." Derek invited me into his apartment, which was nicely furnished and clearly expensive. I wondered how he was affording it on his tech support salary. "Derek, how are you paying for this place?" "I got a better job, marketing coordinator for a startup downtown." "When did you get this job?" 2 weeks ago." Something about his timeline didn't add up. "Derek, you were apartment hunting while you still worked tech support. How did you qualify for this lease?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "I used the Airbnb income as proof of additional earnings." "You told the landlord you had rental income?" "I told him I had supplemental income from property management services." I realized Derek had been planning his exit strategy even before I discovered his business. He'd used the money he'd made from my house to qualify for his own expensive apartment. "Derek, where is the money you made from the Airbnb?" "What do you mean?" "The $2,400 you earned? Where is it?" Derek looked uncomfortable again. "I used it for business expenses and the apartment deposit." "All of it?" "Most of it. There were a lot of startup costs." I thought about the $1,500 Derek had spent on supplies and modifications, plus what was probably a substantial deposit and first-month rent on his new apartment. "Derek, do you have any of that money left?" "Maybe $300. I stared at my son, realizing that he had spent nearly all of the money he'd earned using my house illegally, leaving me to face the legal and tax consequences alone. "Derek, I need you to help me pay the city fines." "Mom, I told you we should present a united front. If you'd worked with me instead of throwing me out—" "Derek, you made this money using my property. The fines are because of your activities. You need to take responsibility." "I can't afford it right now. I just signed a lease and started a new job. I don't have thousands of dollars available." "But you had thousands of dollars available to start your business and move into an expensive apartment." Derek stood up and walked to his window. "Mom, I'm trying to build a life for myself. I can't solve all your problems."
I'm not asking you to solve my problems. I'm asking you to take responsibility for problems you created. Look, I'm sorry the city got involved, but that's not my fault. Someone reported us, and that person is the real problem here. Derek's ability to deflect responsibility was becoming clearer with each conversation. In his mind, he wasn't responsible for running an illegal business. The person who reported the violation was the problem. I wasn't a victim of his deception. I was an uncooperative partner who'd refused to see a good opportunity. "Derek, I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you help me pay the fines that resulted from your business activities?" "I can't. I don't have the money." "You mean you won't?" "I mean, I can't. And Mom, I think you should consider whether pursuing this adversarial approach is really in your best interest."
There it was again, the subtle threat disguised as helpful advice. What does that mean? It means if you try to throw me under the bus at the hearing, I might have to explain that you knew about the operation for 2 weeks before it was shut down. I might have to mention that you met with guests and allowed the operation to continue. I felt like Derek had just punched me in the stomach. He was threatening to lie about my level of involvement to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. Derek, you're threatening to perjure yourself to harm me? I'm not threatening anything. I'm just pointing out that memories can be subjective and different people might remember events differently. I looked around Derek's expensive apartment, thinking about the money he'd made using my house, the legal troubles he'd created for me, and the threats he was now making to protect himself. Derek, I want you to know that I'm going to tell the truth at the hearing. The whole truth about when I discovered your operation, about your business plans, about your expansion strategies, and about this conversation. Mom, that's your choice, but I hope you understand the consequences. I left Derek's apartment knowing that our relationship had fundamentally changed. The son I'd raised wouldn't have threatened his own mother to avoid taking responsibility for his mistakes. This Derek was someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust. The hearing took place 3 weeks later. Margaret had prepared me thoroughly, and we'd organized all the evidence into a clear timeline that demonstrated Derek's deception and my immediate action once I discovered it. Derek attended the hearing with his own lawyer, a young man who seemed more interested in his phone than the proceedings. When Derek testified, he stuck to the basic facts but painted our arrangement as more collaborative than it had actually been. My mother and I discussed various ways to generate additional income from the property, Derek told the hearing officer. She was aware that I was researching short-term rental opportunities. It wasn't technically a lie, but it implied a level of cooperation that had never existed. When it was my turn to testify, I told the complete truth. I described my surgery, my discovery of the operation, my immediate demand that Derek shut it down, and his subsequent threats when legal consequences arose. Margaret presented Derek's business plans as evidence that this had been his independent venture, not a family collaboration. Your Honor, these documents clearly show that Mr. Williams was planning a sophisticated business operation with expansion goals that extended far beyond his mother's property. This was not a casual rental arrangement discussed between family members. This was a calculated business venture using Miss Williams' property without her knowledge or consent. The hearing officer reviewed all the evidence and listened to testimony from both sides. When she rendered her decision, I held my breath. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Miss Williams was an unwitting victim of illegal commercial activity conducted on her property. While property owners bear ultimate responsibility for activities on their property, the circumstances here warrant significant mitigation of penalties. The final fines were reduced to $2,500 plus $800 in back taxes and fees, a total of $3,300, which was much more manageable than the original $18,000. Derek was ordered to pay $1,500 of the fine as the operator of the illegal business. I was responsible for the remaining $1,800 as the property owner. Outside the courthouse, Derek approached me with his lawyer. Mom, I want you to know that I plan to appeal this decision. On what grounds? I think the hearing officer was biased against me because of your emotional testimony. Derek's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Mr. Williams, I should advise you that appeals are expensive and unlikely to succeed given the strength of the evidence against you. I'll find another lawyer if necessary. I looked at Derek and realized that he still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. In his mind, he was a victim of an unfair system that had failed to appreciate his entrepreneurial initiative. Derek, I hope you appeal. I hope you spend thousands of dollars on lawyers and legal fees fighting a decision that held you accountable for your actions. Mom, that's not very supportive. Derek, I'm not your supporter anymore. I'm someone you victimized and then threatened when you faced consequences. I walked away, leaving Derek standing outside the courthouse with his uncomfortable lawyer. 6 months later, I received a check for $1,500 from Derek's wages, garnished by the court when he failed to pay his portion of the fine voluntarily. He'd also received additional penalties for non-payment, bringing his total legal costs to over $3,000. Derek never appealed the decision. His new lawyer had apparently explained the futility and expense of challenging a decision based on such clear evidence. I used the garnished wages to pay the remainder of my fine and then invested the small amount left over in a security system for my house.
Not because I was worried about break-ins, but because I wanted to ensure that no one could ever again use my property without my knowledge. Derek and I haven't spoken since the hearing. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd lost his marketing job after missing too much work for legal meetings and court dates. He'd moved to a smaller apartment and was working retail again. I felt sad about the deterioration of our relationship, but I also felt proud of myself for standing up to his manipulation and threats. The Derek that had emerged during the legal proceedings wasn't someone I wanted in my life, regardless of our biological relationship. My recovery from surgery was complete, and I'd returned to work with a new appreciation for my simple, private life. My house felt like home again, without strangers wandering through it or business operations being conducted in secret. I'd learned that financial security wasn't worth sacrificing my peace of mind, my privacy, or my sense of safety in my own home. I'd also learned that family relationships built on manipulation and threat weren't worth preserving no matter how much history they represented. The Airbnb situation had cost me money, time, and a relationship with my son. But it had also taught me to value my own judgment, protect my own interests, and recognize manipulation disguised as helpfulness. Derek had been right about one thing. I was stronger than I'd realized, just not in the way he'd intended. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.